More than a year and a half after its initial release, Jedi Survivor from Respawn has seen another update, this time targeting the PlayStation 5 and specifically PlayStation 5 Pro, adding in a new update for PSSR with the latest version. And I haven't looked at it personally today, but my friend and colleague Oliver McKenzie over there has, and he's got all the details about this patch. How you doing, Oliver?
Yes, I'm good. We're back to the Jedi Survivor mines, but at least today I think we have a bit of a positive story to tell.
Yeah, at least on the service level. So, Oliver, could you tell me a little bit about where this patch is coming from versus the previous one and what it is exactly trying to remedy?
Yeah. So just as a bit of a recap, back in November, I think, about 2 months ago, we covered the initial PS5 Pro patch for Jedi Survivor, which was patch 9. It had some definite problems. It was using PSSR, obviously. It had some issues with PSSR, some quite bad issues with PSSR. It appeared very unstable, even relative to the old PS5 version in its performance mode. Like, it looked a lot more noisy, a lot less sharp even. It had some very significant issues with foliage, where at times it could kind of strobe in and out, kind of almost violently, a little bit scarily, almost like it was looking completely incorrect there. And the foliage in general was just unstable, super shimmery, especially in motion, just did not look very good. So I think our conclusion at the end of that video was like they should just go back to FSR possibly, or they should look at improving the PSSR implementation or something like that. And indeed, that's kind of what we've seen here. So if you look at the patch notes, the key change they've apparently made is they say they've upgraded to the latest PSSR version. And there are definitely some differences here. So I would say this is a pretty solid improvement in performance mode. In general, it looks a lot better. That pulsing, strobing issue with the foliage, it's basically gone. There's still a tiny bit of it, but you wouldn't really notice it unless you were really looking for it, I think, in specific scenes. Foliage stability overall is definitely improved. At rest, it looks a bit better. But in motion, it's actually a really nice improvement. There's not much shimmering at all. It looks quite reasonable here. I would say it's a lot less distracting here. And in the infamous river run section, where before the game looked pretty disastrous, it's cleaned up enormously. It's not perfect, but I'd actually say it looks very good. It's no longer shimmering as much. The lighting looks a lot more stable. And in general, the game looks reasonably stable in motion. I would say it no longer looks like obviously compromised in your head relative to other solutions. It looks okay here. But there are some things that aren't really ideal. So the image is still on the softer side at rest. That really hasn't improved. It still has that characteristic PSSR instability or noise to the image that we often note in reviews of PlayStation 5 Pro games. It's not that much cleaner on like opaque geometry like in the first level here. And then there's one weird issue that has been introduced with this game, and this game has a number of weird issues that still persist through very many updates, but it has this weird issue that I noticed just in this update. So it seems to have been introduced in this update where there's this like harsh vignetting effect right at the edges of the bottom and right hand sides of the screen. I don't think it's intentional. It does not look like an artistic choice. It looks like something is broken there, so it does not look very good. In the patch notes, they also mentioned reduced foliage flickering, improved reflections on the Kobo River, and improved volumetric fog stability. And I think these are all probably related to that PSSR change. So obviously the foliage flickering has been improved quite a bit, and the reflections on the Kobo River do look a lot more stable. Also a bit softer, but definitely an improvement on what was there before because they looked very flickery there with that RT reflections with the screen space reflections layered on top. It looked very flickery, kind of ugly. Now it looks perfectly fine, I would say. I wasn't able to get a good comparison with the volumetrics, but again, I would imagine there's some improvement there as well. Moving on to the quality mode, you basically see all the same trends there, so I'm not going to go over this in too exhaustive of detail. It looks reasonably clean on the whole now with that high resolution, especially now that some of the issues with the foliage have been addressed. Still a little soft, still a little unstable again, but decent enough on the whole. There's no weird vignetting issue with this mode, but I noticed quite a lot of issues with the game's RTGI, where it wouldn't present properly at times. Like either you'd end up with these black holes in the RTGI, or the RTGI would kind of pop in and out of existence in like this Kobo River run here. And it did not look very good. So this was an issue before, but I noticed it a lot in this new patch, so I can't say that the behavior has necessarily gotten worse. It does seem like it might be that way to me. But yeah, not good. That's been an issue for a while, though. In terms of performance and resolution metrics, Both modes basically run at their respective frame rate targets, so 30 FPS and 60 FPS. In the performance mode, there are some small deviations below in that Kobo River section where you can kind of run through. It can drop a few frames here and there, accompanied by a little bit of tearing in the top portion of the screen, but elsewhere throughout a few hours of play, I didn't really notice any issues at all. So it's basically like that old patch. I don't think there's any substantial difference here. In terms of resolutions, the pixel counts that I did looked pretty similar. So 900p-ish in the performance mode internally, going to 1800p. In the quality mode, more like 1584p-ish, 1620p-ish, somewhere in that range, often sometimes higher, sometimes lower again, going to 4K there. Although, again, in both modes, they look a little bit softer and lower detail than a lot of other temporal upscalers would if they had gone to similar resolutions like FSR, like XeSS, like DLSS. So yeah, that's basically the lie of the land relative to the old mode. But I don't know if you have any reaction here, Alex, because I think it's definitely improved, but it's also, I think, not 100% where we'd like to be necessarily. But it's definitely a good deal better, I think.
Right. This is interesting because it's weird almost to see a call out in the patch notes for something that is almost internal to Sony's own SDK environment. Like most people wouldn't usually put out unless it was a PC version of a game, you'd say like the latest version of XX middleware, right? So I think that is interesting that they actually explicitly call that out in the patch notes. Looking at what you showed me, I'm really happy that a lot of the really obvious visual issues like the flickering behind the foliage and whatnot have disappeared, as those and some of the breakup stuff that you showed also while running really put it in a step quite a bit below even the base PS5 version of the game in a lot of ways. So that is good to see. So those things are cleared up, but a lot of the standard PSSR issues still remain, and the kind of the fact that this is a respawn kind of issue here, but for some reason, whenever they release some sort of technical update for their game, it's easy to find other aspects now which aren't working correctly. And this is another patch where the same thing is happening. This happened when they released PSSR initially, but now, and something that didn't happen at like launch, for example, is the RTGI breaking so commonly. Like when I reviewed this game back at launch, that wasn't actually an issue. The fact that there's some sort of weird vignetting occurring on the screen's edge, presumably because some post-process is not working anymore correctly. It would be really nice if it wasn't left up to the players and the tech review press, such as ourselves, to point out obvious regressions. And it would be great if they were cleaned up before a patch launched. It would probably save them a lot of money. But yeah, it is a little bit weird to see. So, but with that update to PSSR, and probably one of the worst PSSR titles we saw after the PS5 Pro's launch, how is this latest version of PSSR stacking up against DLSS, for example, in this game?
So yeah, I decided to do some comparisons with PC to round things out. And basically what I've done here is I've gotten the PC version using DLSS in performance mode at 1800p to roughly align with where the PS5 Pro is. So that's basically a close enough match. Not perfect, but it's reasonably close to where the PS5 Pro is. It's not really at that DLSS level in terms of stability typically. In stills, we see a lot of breakup in the foliage. It looks noisy, a bit messy. I actually noticed some pulsing or strobing on the foliage in both versions of the game here, but it's a little bit better on the PC version with DLSS. The Pro does not look horrible in that respect or anything, but it's not really obnoxious like it was before. It's a little bit worse on Pro. So that is a characteristic that's common to both machine learning upscalers here. Also, yeah, on like opaque geometry, on like this overhang here, there's like that classic PSSR noise, as we call it. It's kind of omnipresent here. But in motion, the Pro is greatly improved relative to its earlier showing. And I would say relative to DLSS, it is noisier, but it's also sharper. That is a consistent characteristic we do tend to note with PS5 Pro patches that do use PSSR. Finally, there's one upscaling scenario where I found that PS5 Pro actually looked a little bit better overall which is that river run that really exposed the prior version of the game on Pro. It actually looks a bit noisier on PC. I found the pattern of noise and kind of splotchiness to the lighting on Pro to be a little bit less distracting. So overall, it's more competitive there, but that's also kind of a weird scenario. It's indirectly lit in kind of a funny way. It's not necessarily going to track with the lighting in the rest of the game. That's like a weird stress test that I found that was just bizarrely broken before. Now it's a lot better, even a little bit better than DLSS, curiously enough. So overall, DLSS, it's a pretty clear winner, but PSSR has taken a step ahead. I do think that the clarity and stability of the image both need to be improved. And it's kind of weird with PSSR because in the scenario where temporal upscalers often look their best, at rest, where they're able to accumulate as much detail as possible, that's weirdly where PSSR is kind of not up to standard here, and in motion it's better. That's kind of a weird element where actually we're not seeing some of those failure points in motion. Sometimes we are seeing those failure points at rest. But Alex, I think you have a certain caveat here that actually makes this comparison a little bit less favorable for PSSR, even a little bit less favorable than these top-line results might indicate.
Yeah, basically, Jedi Survivor got DLSS after launch, and when they did launch it, they launched at a time when DLSS was kind of in between versions. There was this like the C model and the D model, and right now the game, if you were to load it up on PC, it's still using a DLSS model from about 1.5 or even longer years ago, and that's the version 3.1. Now we're on version, well, I think 3.7, but it actually might be 3.8 now. And they've replaced actually these C and D models, which they used with this new E model, which kind of is the best of both worlds. It's a lot better than the older ones at both at rest and in movement, in terms of clarity and the potential for ghosting. So when we do look at comparisons like this in a game specifically like this one, we aren't actually using the latest version of the CNN model, and we're definitely not using DLSS 4. So that's one thing to keep in mind with all these kind of comparisons here. But still, I mean, it's cool to see that it is improving in the areas where it is vis-a-vis other scalers. But like you said, the fact that we see issues while sitting still that are different, like quite heavily than those in motion, makes me wonder if there's some sort of like bias in the training data set or something like that, where they haven't, there's just not enough training at the moment to cover the breadth of cases of camera movement. But yeah, okay, so we've covered most of everything so far in this video regarding the patch itself, but what are your kind of concluding thoughts here, Oliver?
Yeah, it's, not to belabor this too much, but it's a nice improvement for sure. Not revelatory, but a nice improvement. It makes the Pro version, I would say, serviceable enough. This is no longer on our PS5 Pro like blacklist of games that are real problems on the hardware, like the earlier version of Silent Hill 2, which was also patched. This is okay. It's not necessarily I'm not sure if it's an upgrade over FSR2 in this title. At these resolutions, what it would be. I think it's probably, in the mix there, but not a clear upgrade over FSR2. Mostly because that fundamental instability at rest, that's still my main concern with a lot of games that use PSSR. I'm not sure what this says about PSSR itself. They do say it's the latest version, so presumably this is reflective of the PSSR state-of-the-art as it is. It's not at that DLSS level. Plus, the state-of-the-art has moved forward somewhat, arguably, since we looked at this game last, with DLSS 4, with its new transformer model for super resolution and ray reconstruction, and of course, FSR 4, which we've only seen a brief peek at on the CES show floor, and all we have to show for it is some off-screen footage filmed with my mirrorless camera. But at least in the sample that we saw, it didn't exhibit some of those stereotypical PSSR issues. And to my eyes, it maybe overall looked a little bit better. So that was certainly encouraging. Again, just one game, brief sample, but early signs are encouraging there. But, there are some games on the PS5 Pro that do look a little bit better that we've looked at recently too, like the PSSR implementation in Black Myth Wukong that looked pretty good, although that was working from more conservative upscale factors than Jedi Survivor, which is a game that is pushing out that upscaler, pushing it a little bit harder here. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I am interested to see how PSSR evolves. I am interested to see how it works in upcoming games like Kingdom Come and Assassin's Creed Shadows, both of which are reportedly using PSSR. To me, it needs to get to a level, in my view, where it's clearly better than FSR2 and FSR3, because those were the solutions that would be used in its place in most titles nowadays. And then there's the second level where you're talking about XeSS, DLSS 3, maybe FSR4. Be nice if it, got to that level as well. But I think in the interim, it's just important that like it improves to a level where PS5 Pro image quality is really delivering on all that was promised. And so far with PS5 Pro, there are some titles that get close to that promise, I would say, where the image quality is improved by a large margin, or where graphical features are being introduced that are very interesting. There are a good number of games like that, but there are also some games where it's not quite at that level. And ideally, we'd see more games brought to that level, and the best of the brightest of those titles really exceeding kind of almost our expectations there. So that's what I'd hope for in the future. I don't know what you think about that, Alex, but that's kind of where I'm at with this at the moment.
I kind of agree with you wholly there. PSSR was not brought into a market in terms of that was empty. We had other competing technologies in existence that we could compare and contrast against, as well as roughly 6 to 4, depending upon when you want to start counting, years of evolution of these differently styled upscalers, right? And as a result, if it comes in not swinging and, hitting the ball in the bleachers, sorry for an awful sports metaphor, but basically if it doesn't come out and doesn't wow us, then it is actually a little bit sad, and it makes you wonder a little bit about what the purpose of the Pro is, the purpose of the PSSR program, because it's going to soon, when AMD brings it out, have a competitor technology within its own ecosystem, essentially, of things that run on AMD GPU technology in FSR4. And if that comes out, and if it is much like we saw in our preview there, in terms of that 4K performance mode in Ratchet & Clank, which is actually kind of one of those test case games we like to go to because it has a lot of movement, very detailed textures, post-processing and ray tracing combining with stuff. That's a hard test case game, and it looked pretty all right already so far, and had image quality features that we thought were better than PSSR. Even just off screen, you can appreciate that without the comparisons. Well, then I think it calls into question the entire purpose of PSSR. Now, there's a lot we don't know about FSR4. One, we haven't seen it in a whole bunch of titles yet. And secondly, we don't know what the performance considerations of it are. Mm-hmm. I presume the RX 9070 XT and 9070 are in many ways superior to the GPU in the PS5 Pro. So we don't know like if it fits the performance profile there or anything, right? A memory profile. We don't know all of that yet. So maybe it's not completely competitive, but it's just a strange situation in general. And I hope that we see a forward trajectory up for PSSR over the next year, where we don't have to call out obvious issues in games anymore. Kind of like the position we've reached on PC with DLSS, where I don't really have to comment on image quality in games anymore, except for when there's like some really big issue that just bothers me, right? And that's more of a rarity. All right, Oliver. So I think that's the end of this short, quick look video here on PS5 Pro and Jedi Survivor. Another update, and maybe there's another update to come based upon what you said here. But thanks a lot, Oliver.
Thanks, Alex. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, if you did like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring that little bell in the corner, support us on Patreon. Also, check out our store to see all the merchandising wares of Digital Foundry to help us out. And as always, this is Alex and Oliver bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.